You would never have guessed that the haughty manager Karen, with her pompous demeanor, would spark an astonishing twist by insulting Will Smith, unaware that he was, in fact, the owner of the restaurant. The scream tore through the perfect stillness, of Evergreen Lake like a bullet. Karen's fingers gripped the wooden dock until splinters dug into her palms, her eyes fixed on the empty kayak drifting lazily across the water's surface. The morning mist still clung to the lake, transforming the scene into something otherworldly and terrible. Will, the name ripped from her throat, raw and desperate. Only the distant call of birds answered her. 20 feet away, a small life. Jacket bobbed in the gentle current. In one fluid motion, Karen kicked off her shoes and dove. The shock of cold water stole her breath, but she pushed forward with powerful strokes, her manager's mind cataloguing horrible statistics even as she searched frantically. Children can drown in less than 2 minutes. Brain damage begins at 4. The serene lake that had drawn her family to this remote cabin now seemed vast and merciless. When her hand brushed against something solid beneath the surface, Karen's heart stopped. She took a deep breath and plunged beneath the murky water, her fingers closing around a small arm. With strength born of pure adrenaline, she pulled the small body upward and kicked desperately toward shore. On the dock, a crowd had gathered. Karen could make out her husband Smith's tall figure pushing through, his face a mask of terror. As her feet found purchase on the muddy bottom, strong hands reached to take Will from her arms. "He's not breathing," she gasped, stumbling onto the shore. A woman stepped forward. "I'm a doctor," she said, her voice calm as she lowered Will to the ground. The woman's efficient movements as she began CPR contrasted sharply with the chaos around them. 1, 2, 3 compressions. Karen counted silently, her wet clothes clinging to her trembling body as Smith wrapped his arms around her shoulders. "Please," she whispered, "please." The doctor bent to breathe air into Will's lungs. Once, twice. Nothing. More compressions, more breaths. Karen turned her face into Smith's chest, unable to watch, when a small strangled cough broke the silence, then another. Water spilled from Will's mouth as the doctor gently turned him onto his side. Her son's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to fear as he looked up at the ring of strange faces. "Mom?" he whimpered. Karen collapsed beside him, gathering, his small shivering body close. "I'm here, baby, I'm here." As relief washed over her, something darker lurked at the edges of her consciousness. A hollow space filled with questions she wasn't ready to face. Questions about responsibility, about vigilance, about the moment that changed everything, the moment she'd looked away. 8 months earlier, Karen had stood in front of her, restaurant staff, watching snowflakes drift past the window. December in Pinewood, Minnesota brought early darkness and a special kind of restlessness to her employees. "Ms. Karen, are we still doing the special holiday menu next week?" Elena Rodriguez asked, her dark eyes hopeful. The seasonal event was all anyone could talk about. "Absolutely," Karen assured her with a smile. "As long as the suppliers deliver on time." At 34, Karen had been managing this exclusive restaurant for 7 years. Her establishment was a sanctuary of order and sophistication, every detail meticulously planned. Her colleagues often joked that she could run the entire hospitality group if given the chance, and Karen took quiet pride in her reputation for competence. Control was her comfort zone, her shield against the messy unpredictability of life. The final customers left, and Karen breathed a sigh of relief. As much as she loved managing the restaurant, Friday nights held a special kind of magic, especially today. "Don't forget to finalize the inventory counts before Monday," she called as her staff filed out. After reviewing the night's receipts and updating next week's staffing schedule, Karen drove home through the swirling snow, excitement building in her chest. Tonight was special. Smith was cooking dinner, and they had an announcement for Will. Their cozy 2-story house glowed with warmth as she pulled into the driveway. Inside, the smell of garlic and roasting chicken filled the air. Smith stood at the stove, his tall frame bent over a simmering pot, while 5-year-old Will sat at the kitchen table, coloring with intense concentration. "Mommy," Will launched himself at her legs. Daddy's making a special dinner and he won't. Tell me why. Karen exchanged a conspiratorial look with Smith over their son's head. Her husband's kind eyes crinkled at the corners, the same way they had when they'd met in college 13 years ago. At 36, Smith's dark hair was already threaded with silver at the temples, giving him a distinguished look that suited his thoughtful personality. "It is a special night," Karen agreed, hanging up her coat. "How about you help me set the table?" During dinner, Lucas regaled them with kindergarten adventures, while Sarah watched him, marveling at his animated expressions so like Michael's. With his tousled brown hair and quick smile, Lucas had his father's warm charm and her own stubborn determination. When they'd finished their meal, Michael cleared his throat. "Lucas, your mom and I have something to tell you." Lucas looked up, a smear of chocolate from his dessert on his cheek. "How would you feel about spending the whole summer at Grandpa's lake cabin?" Sarah asked. Lucas's eyes widened. "The whole summer, like with the fish and the boat and everything?" Michael nodded. "I've arranged to work remotely and Mom's going to take the summer off from teaching summer school." "But what about my friends and soccer camp?" Lucas asked, his initial excitement wavering. Sarah had anticipated this concern. "We thought maybe you could invite a friend to visit for a week or two. And there's a recreation center near the lake that has all kinds of sports programs." Lucas considered this, his small face serious. "Will there be other kids?" "Absolutely," Michael assured him. "The lake has lots of families during summer." "Can I bring my telescope? Grandpa said the stars are really bright there." Sarah relaxed. "Of course you can." Later that night, after Lucas was tucked in bed, Sarah joined Michael on the couch, curling against his side. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked quietly. Michael's arm tightened around her. "I do. We all need this break, Sarah. Especially you." She knew what he meant. The past year had been relentless. The increased pressures at school, her mother's illness, the 2 miscarriages that had left her hollow and exhausted. The lake house represented escape, a chance to breathe and heal. "I've been thinking," Michael said carefully, "maybe while we're there we could talk about other options for growing our family." Sarah stiffened slightly. They'd had this conversation before: adoption, fostering, alternatives she wasn't ready to consider because they felt like admitting defeat. "Maybe," she said non-committally. Michael didn't push. It was one of the things she loved most about him, his patience, his willingness to give her space. Sometimes, though, she wondered if his consideration masked his own grief, if he was sheltering her from his disappointment. "One thing at a time," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Let's just focus on having an amazing summer." As winter melted into spring, anticipation grew. Sarah threw herself into planning, researching activities around Evergreen Lake, ordering water safety equipment, creating packing lists. Control was her response to anxiety, always had been. The night before their departure, Sarah found Lucas in his room, surrounded by piles of toys and books. "Honey, we can't take everything," she said gently. "Remember, we talked about choosing your special things." Lucas looked up, his lower lip trembling slightly. "But what if I need them?" Sarah sat on the edge of his bed. "Tell you what, let's pick your absolute favorites for now. If you really miss something specific, Grandma can bring it when she visits next month." Lucas nodded, then pulled something from under his pillow, a worn, handmade blanket. "This is coming for sure." Sarah's throat tightened. The blanket had been a gift from her mother when Lucas was born. After her death last year, it had become Lucas's most treasured possession. "Definitely," she agreed, running her fingers over the soft fabric. "Some things are too important to leave behind." The early summer weeks at Evergreen Lake unfolded exactly as Sarah had hoped. The cabin, which had belonged to Michael's family for generations, sat on a quiet bay, surrounded by towering pines. Days took on a peaceful rhythm. Morning walks along the shore, afternoons swimming and exploring, evenings on the deck watching the sunset. Michael set up his remote office in the cabin's small sunroom, emerging between meetings to join them. For lunch or a quick swim, Sarah rediscovered the pleasure of reading for enjoyment, working her way through the stack of novels she'd brought, and Lucas blossomed in the outdoors, his natural curiosity finding endless outlets in the woods and water. By the 4th of July, Sarah felt more relaxed than she had in years. The persistent knot of anxiety that had lived between her shoulder blades had finally loosened. The holiday weekend brought an influx of visitors to the lake. Neighbors hosted barbecues and fireworks lit up the night sky over the water. At one such gathering, they met the Hendersons, Elena and David, with their 8-year-old daughter Mia. Lucas and Mia bonded instantly over a shared love of frogs and scary stories. "We should get the kids together for a play date," Elena suggested as they watched the children chasing fireflies in the growing darkness. Sarah readily agreed. Social connections had always come easily to her, and she found herself enjoying the adult conversation after weeks of primarily interacting with Lucas. David, a landscape architect, was keenly interested in Michael's work in environmental law. "We should grab a beer sometime," he told Michael. "I'm working on a restoration project that might interest you." As they walked home that night, Lucas skipping ahead with a jar of fireflies, Michael squeezed Sarah's hand. "Making friends already," he teased. "Just like college." Sarah smiled, leaning into his shoulder. "It feels good," she admitted. "Being around people again." "You've been different here," Michael said thoughtfully. "More like your old self." Sarah knew what he meant. Back home, the losses had changed her, made her more cautious, more controlling, as if perfect planning could prevent more pain. Here she was slowly letting go. The next morning, the Henderson family arrived at their dock in a sleek powerboat. "Who's up for water skiing?" David called. While the adults took turns skiing, Lucas and Mia played on the shore under Sarah's watchful eye. When Elena offered her a turn, Sarah hesitated. "Go on," Michael encouraged. "I'll watch Lucas." The sensation of skimming across the water was exhilarating, a rush of freedom that left Sarah laughing breathlessly when she finally tumbled into the lake. As David circled back to pick her up, she caught sight of Michael and Lucas on the dock, both waving enthusiastically. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Sarah and Michael sat on the deck sharing a bottle of wine. Fireflies blinked in the darkness, and the gentle lap of waves against the shore created a perfect soundtrack. "I've been thinking," Sarah said quietly, "about what you said before we came here, about other ways to grow our family." Michael set down his glass, giving her his full attention. "I think I'm ready to talk about it," she continued. "Not decide yet, but explore the possibilities." Michael took her hand, his eyes reflecting the same mix of hope and caution she felt. "What changed?" Sarah considered the question. "Being here, watching Lucas thrive, remembering that I'm more than my failures." She paused, and realizing that there are different ways to build the future we want. Michael pulled her close, pressing his lips to her forehead. "No rush," he murmured. "We have all summer to talk." The following weeks brought a deepening friendship with the Hendersons. The families fell into an easy pattern of shared meals and activities. Eleanor, a pediatric nurse, shared Sarah's practical nature, while David's easygoing humor balanced Michael's thoughtfulness. One evening, while the men took the children fishing, Eleanor and Sarah sat on the Hendersons' deck, enjoying the rare quiet. "How did you and David decide to stop at one child?" Sarah asked, the wine making her bolder than usual. Elena's expression shifted subtly. "We didn't exactly decide," she said after a moment. "There were complications with Mia's birth. More children weren't an option." "I'm sorry," Sarah said. Quickly, "I shouldn't have—" "It's okay," Elena assured her. "It was hard at first. I always pictured a big family, but we adjusted our vision." She smiled softly. "And honestly, it led us to where we are now. David's job brought us here 3 years ago, and it's been wonderful for Mia." Sarah nodded, thinking about her own journey. "Michael and we've been trying for another baby. After 2 miscarriages, I'm starting to accept that it might not happen." Elena reached over and squeezed her hand. "Whatever path you choose, you'll make it right for your family. That's what parents do." The simple wisdom of Elena's words stayed with Sarah. That night, she shared her conversation with Michael, and they had the most honest discussion about Their future they'd had in years. "I think I'd like to look into adoption when we get home," she said finally. "See what the process involves." Michael's face lit up with cautious hope. "I'd like that too." As July melded into August, their days took on a golden quality, each one treasured more as the end of summer approached. Lucas, now deeply tanned and increasingly confident in the water, begged daily to use the kayak Michael had taught him to paddle in the shallow cove near their dock. On the second Tuesday in August, Sarah stood on the dock, watching Lucas paddle along the shoreline, Michael beside her with his arm around her waist. The morning light danced on the water, and a sense of perfect contentment washed over her. "I need to check in with the office," Michael said, kissing her cheek. "Back in 20 minutes. "We'll be fine," Sarah assured him, settling into the dock chair with her book. For 10 minutes she alternated between reading and watching Lucas, who remained within the boundaries they'd established. Then her phone rang, the school principal with questions about the upcoming year. Sarah answered, keeping one eye on Lucas as she discussed curriculum changes. It was only 2 minutes, maybe 3, her attention divided between the call and her son. When she looked up, the kayak was drifting empty in the center of the cove. In the hours after Lucas's rescue, the cabin filled with people. Paramedics insisted on taking him to the nearest hospital 20 miles away. The doctor who had performed CPR, Dr. Anita Wilson, they learned, rode in the ambulance with them, explaining that she owned a cabin on the opposite shore. He was underwater for less than 2 minutes, she assured them as they waited for test results. His vital signs are strong. Children are remarkably resilient. When they were finally allowed to see Lucas, he was sitting up in bed, looking small against the white hospital sheets, but alert. His first words broke something open inside Sarah. "I'm sorry I went too far, Mommy," he whispered. Sarah fought back tears as she sat carefully on the edge of his bed. "No, baby. I'm the one who's sorry. I should have been watching more carefully." Michael stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. "The important thing is that you're okay," he told Lucas. "That's all that matters." Later that evening, after Lucas was discharged with instructions to rest, they returned to the cabin. Eleanor and David had prepared dinner, and Dr. Wilson stopped by to check on Lucas once more. "You should know," she told Sarah quietly, "that your quick action made all the difference. Don't torture yourself over what happened. Focus on the fact that you saved him." But in the dark hours of the night, with Lucas finally asleep between them in the big bed, Sarah couldn't stop the torrent of what-ifs. What if she hadn't answered that call? What if she'd been a few seconds slower? What if Dr. Wilson hadn't been nearby? "I can hear you thinking," Michael whispered, reaching across Lucas to touch her face. "Stop." "I can't," she admitted, her voice breaking. "One moment of inattention, Michael, that's all it took." "Sarah, look at me." In the dim light, his eyes were serious. "What happened today was terrifying, but Lucas is okay, we're okay." "But what if—" "No what ifs," he cut her off gently. "We can't live like that. You've always tried to control everything, to plan for every contingency. But sometimes things just happen, and all we can do is respond the best we can, and you did." Sarah looked down at Lucas, his chest rising and falling steadily in sleep. The thought of losing him was unbearable, yet here he was, safe between them. "The adoption paperwork will have questions about supervision," she said suddenly. "What if they find out about this and decide we're not fit parents?" Michael's brow furrowed. "Is that what you're worried about? Sarah, one accident doesn't define us as parents, and hiding it wouldn't be the right way to start that journey anyway." She knew he was right. The path forward wasn't about perfect control. It was about honest vulnerability, about accepting that love always involved risk. "I want to talk to Dr. Wilson tomorrow," she said finally, "about water safety programs. Maybe we could help. Bring something to the lake community." Michael smiled. "That sounds like you, finding the lesson, making something good come from it." In the days that followed, Lucas's resilience amazed them. After 24 hours of rest, he was eager to return to his activities, though he now wore his life jacket, even for shoreline play, without complaint. Dr. Wilson connected them with a local water safety initiative, and Sarah threw herself into organizing an event for lake residents before the summer's end. The project gave purpose to her anxiety, transforming fear into action. On their final evening at the lake, they hosted a small gathering, the Hendersons, Dr. Wilson, and a few other neighbors they'd befriended. As the adults talked on the deck, Sarah watched Lucas and Mia playing a board game inside, visible through the cabin windows. Elena joined her at the railing. "You've done something important here," she said, nodding toward the water safety pamphlets Sarah had designed. "Sometimes our most painful moments lead to our most meaningful contributions." "I keep thinking about what you said about adjusting your vision," Sarah replied. "This summer hasn't been what I expected. It's been harder and scarier, but also more profound." Later, after their guests had gone and Lucas was asleep, Sarah and Michael stood at the end of the dock. The night was clear. Stars reflected perfectly in the still water. "Are you ready to go home?" Michael asked, his arm around her waist. Sarah considered the question. Home meant returning to routines and responsibilities. It meant beginning the adoption process they'd discussed. It meant carrying forward the lessons of this summer, about control and surrender, about fear and resilience. "Yes," she said finally. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." The lake whispered around them, gentle waves, lapping at the dock pilings. In that moment, Sarah felt the weight of silence, not the terrible silence of that morning when Lucas disappeared beneath the water, but a peaceful quiet filled with possibility. She turned in Michael's arms, resting, her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Tomorrow they would pack up and return to their regular lives, changed by what they'd experienced here. The future remained unwritten, full of uncertainties they couldn't control. But for now, this moment was enough. Standing together under the stars, holding close the knowledge of how precious and precarious life could be, and choosing to move forward anyway. Not with perfect confidence, but with perfect love.